Patrick Deeley reads some of his own work now on this week's edition of The Poet's Eye.
Thank you very much. One of the first things my child is liable to do when I get home in the evening is to ask me to tell him a story. Not a poem, mind you, but I'm working on it, and he is only 3 after all. Tonight, I'd like to tell you some stories, most of which are true. And the first one concerns that self-same child of mine. It was written around the time of the nuclear accident in Chernobyl. His first word. He stomps round the room, lisping his first word, light, as 2 syllables. I applaud him and the word he's in love with, then turn again to the story of Leonid Telyatnikov, power station fire chief, asleep on holiday when the phone called him back to Chernobyl, that catastrophe of heat and light, a hellmouth which breathed on him for 3 hours as he fought to keep the reactor roof from caving in. He recalls Tishura, Vashchuk, others who fell. Now he awaits death or a miracle, while here my tired-limbed child tugs impatiently at my elbow, bringing me back to the light. Soon I will carry him up to the restorative darkness, the still possible good night. Go back to my own childhood for this next poem. It concerns one of the first films I saw, not on TV or in a cinema even, but in a marquee in a big field down in County Galway. The film was set in Africa. The poem is called The Pictures. The white protagonist pressed, square-jawed and zealous, past mud huts where natives oozed admiration and bewilderment. Pressed fearless into jungle, speckled distances a-shiver with mires and pythons, feverish drone of sun-fed creatures lapsing into sudden silence, which a host of arrows dispersed. Loosed by savages stood ebon and still behind trees. Luck contrived to save him, his ambushers proving in need of more stringent practice, though close shaves thudded impressively into wood. He, armed only in righteousness, swung into swashbuckling action, coolly dislodging his enemies. And we, bunched in paint-flecked, musty seats, hoodwinked by his depiction as hero, went on supporting the villain. I grew up in a townland close to Tina Mine, at one time one of the richest lead, zinc and silver mines in Europe. A number of years ago, Tina Mine was worked out and abandoned. And this next poem, called simply The Mine, is my reaction to that whole process. Silver lights no longer stood the zinc horizon. Machines that through 2 decades droned are empty now of purpose, their dull will wound down. I plod heart-scalded acres, a strange dust burnishing my boots. Dip a tentative finger in the emulsified face of a well. Taste bitterness where once there was faith. Soon earth chasms, rubble rears skyward. Buildings sink into neglect. A few technicians dismantle things. Water lodges in tire tracks of lorries whose slow convoys of ore-rich dirt have all been brought to port. I was a child when low-flying planes grumbled out of nowhere, prospecting, photographing the flat East Galway landscape. I remember one making a beeline for me, or so it seemed as I craned and craned my neck to catch its flight, to let that dark arrow of daring enter my forehead. Soon after, the mine throbbed into being. Fields that had known only the quiet grazing of sheep were systematically overtaken by mechanical moles, incising past root sinew to earth bone. Still, local men got work. Roads were widened. Towns thrived. At night, I would watch the mine's clustered lights shining across rush-laden fields like the imagined apparel of wealth, or an alluring city within reach of my doorstep. Bad news brought reality back. Men mauled by conveyor belts, caught in explosions or cave-ins, rumours of others who drank for courage, or perhaps to slake the poison in their veins. Now the last miners have climbed to the redundant surface. The company has moved elsewhere. There remains only an echo of the boom years, hunting down sealed mine shafts to honeycombed earth, a useless residue of rich resources sold to the stranger for a song. Awkwardly I stand, impaled by anger. It will buckle in time like a fatigued spar. My father was a hurley maker, and my brothers and I would accompany him to woods to fell ash trees to provide timber for the job. And some of my most enjoyable times were in the wood felling trees with my family. Also some of the most hard-earned. This next poem comes from one such afternoon in the wood, and the poem is called Rings. The tree stump remains earthed after our saw has swept on to other severings. We return later to spread our lunches on its flat surface. I picture us accoutred in protective gear as knights at this round table, our blade in wood, Excalibur. When mealtime is finished, I tidy up, sweeping my hand across grooved fibres of wood. Half-forgotten words sprout on my tongue. Cambium, xylem, and phloem, bugbears from an old botany lesson, mellowed like the memory of bullies at school, and annual ring, familiar as the name of a friend whose life now revolves in different circuits to mine. There's the magic of counting inward over 3 decades, spanning white summer growths and thin brown winterings, memories uncoiling in my head as I hypnotically spin back through my own history. In the end, I lose track, disconcerted by the closeness of ever-decreasing rings, and settle for the saw's song across wooded space, my bearings. Well, my father died in an accident in a wood while felling trees near Athlone in 1978. A few years after that, I wrote this poem, a poem of acceptance called Scars. I am no prince in a child's book, lancing a path through trees to awaken your death sleep with a kiss, but flesh of your flesh, picking a place to enter the wood where a wire slackens around a trunk, having failed to strangle it. How long before this tree swelled into sufficient growth to break the barbed grip? My fingers trace thick healings, scars pursing their lips, as if appalled into silence by their own terrible births, while the wire loosely drops. I push on to the last clearing you cut, knowing I will find only scattered splinters of wood, ferns combing the silence. There I make my peace. Now the wound of your death has healed in me to a scar through the intervening years. I migrated, others emigrated. About 1980, I think it was, I met a man travelling on a train between Galway and Dublin. A middle-aged man heading for the boat to Holyhead. And this next poem is loosely based on things he told me about his life and it's called Emigrant. Your train to exile, blunt-faced as a battering ram, moves inexorably on its track towards the townland's heart. You see it coming from far back, past bleating verdant fields, trees and bushes that have raised themselves from the dead, past bungalows and barns built by cautious men in a sudden spree of borrowed banknotes, an optimism that didn't last, past the straggling outskirts of the town, the backs of houses where washing inhales the wind and dogs swap rowdyisms. Suitcase in fist, you say goodbye to loved ones. Leave behind the consoling impression of being lawn dokish, like raftery. Your face has the crag quality of dry stone walls. Your complexion's windswept raw. But in your accent are all the cadences of rain. You wear like a birthmark the bog English you were found guilty of at school. Slushy consonants and broad vowels others thought prudent to lose. And once, on a faded wall map, the teacher's cane drifted off from Eccles' finger pointing west to America, my lad, where you'll end up after you've tired of snagging spuds and turnips. Defying him still, you go east, settling now to the rhythmic clack, reflecting quietly on Connacht's other tag, Cinderella Province, hurt that it seems so apt. Compartmented like Cunists gone craw, her young take their naive energy to hell away, embodiments of Cromwell's course gone wrong. Some you recognize, migrants who faithfully return at weekends to pick up their former lives beyond the limbo of offices' bedsits. Others, less familiar, both bound after their brief annual visit, earnestly do their party piece. Men and women swaying together, beer swill and sentimental song gurgling in their throats for the owl sod of Erin that cannot give them a living. You shake your head, dismiss the pull of roots as fond foolish in this world shrinking age. Be damned to it, you say, the ghost pain of amputation, a debt you've no wish to repay, while evening slowly darkens and compartment lights come on. Such a person might well have wound up in a bedsitter, as I did here in Dublin. In fact, I wound up in a whole array of bedsitters, but one in particular I want to mention, a basement in Dublin 6. And this poem is dedicated to the person who took my place in that flat. Basement. Glad of my escape, I still wonder how the new occupant is faring. Each evening I pause while passing the old red brick house and scan its basement. Usually a light glows behind window bars and a man's bowed figure is visible, his shoulders hunched, elbows leaning on a table. Sometimes his fingers tap dance in a toil of idleness or boredom. Or he moves to retrieve something, moves as though lumbered by oppression. Is it the notion of so many rooms, their lives and luggage? A whole house propped on him has tensed his mind, cast him in the role of Atlas. I wonder if telltale sounds from overhead still pierce the ceiling, or if he employs tactics like mine, letting his imagination flesh out each voice, step, bed squeak, door slam, in a sense redeeming angle-cramped living. And when he encounters fellow occupants on domestic errands, do they stop and talk? Or does that reticence I was party to still stand, permitting them only to smile with the shyness of intimate strangers? course, between leaving home and getting to work here in Dublin as a teacher, as I now do, I spent 2 very enjoyable years at college in Drumcondra. But while there, I began to see the gap which exists between the academic style of life and a life of hard physical work, which I had been used to an extent. And more importantly, how society views both of them. Society tends to exalt the one and perhaps denigrate the other. Like manual work can easily be turned into menial work. And this next poem is a poem in praise of people who graft. Eventually it comes out like that, I hope. Cleaning woman. You catch me napping long past lecture time. Your words slap like wet mops in dusty corners of my mind. For all I know, you are still on your knees, making grained tiles shine, or looking through dormitories a vacuum cleaner. Your Martha hands forever doing the unglamorous. First and last, a pragmatist was the impression you conveyed, brisk yet thorough at each task. And if your mind ever strayed, I never knew to where or thought to ask, seeing you only as a reminder of all I had escaped. Work soil, backache, sparings on which my parents lived, strangers like you to praise, their fingers worn from contact with so many ungiving surfaces. Sometimes poems come to me from things or aspects of things which appear out of place together. For example, if I saw something like a white blackbird, that might start me scribbling. And I believe there are such things as white blackbirds, by the way. But one thing that certainly did that was seeing a group of young people in a graveyard, which they used as a meeting place for courtship and much more besides. Anyway, that gave rise to this poem, which I'm going to finish up with now. And this poem is called Figures in a Landscape. The young ones gather at dusk among headstones that slant away from the vanishing pride of an abandoned church. Barred from aisles and pews and dust-choked confessionals, from altar and empty tabernacle, they take their revenge on oak wood by scrawling graffiti to gods of vinyl and celluloid. Bottles of cheap wine, handed ceremoniously around, purple their lips, becoming a communion of sorts. There's the Latin of swear words and the incense of smokes. Casually, as if intending no malice, they martyr with stones the high arched windows, or beating paths to privacy within the greater privacy cemetery walls afford, stand in pairs, lovers measuring themselves against the famished slabs. Thank you very much.